Welcome to Blooms and Stitches by Anne Marie. This is chapter 8 in my audiobook, A Journey from Jamaica to Becoming. This chapter is entitled Pregnant with Hope. Thank you for listening. In Jamaica, there was a phrase used to describe girls who appeared overly mature for their age. People will call them force ripe. The term came from the practice of picking fruits, such as a mango, before they were fully ripe, then wrapping it in a newspaper and storing it in a dark place so it would ripen faster than it naturally would. Some researchers describe this phenomenon as accelerated emotional development under survival conditions. Many teenagers who grew up in Jamaica's inner city communities were forced to think about consequences, protection, family survival, and adult responsibilities long before their peers. Not because they wanted to, but because their circumstances demanded it. I was one of those teenagers growing up in Raytown, Jamaica. Attending Convent of Mercy Academy High School became an important foundation for my education. However, it also reminded me daily of the clear divide between rich and poor. Every time I arrived or left the high school grounds, there was a glaring reminder of who belonged to which world. I would watch longingly as parents arrive in shiny cars to pick up their daughters. The girls would sit beneath the monkey tambin tree, waiting comfortably for their rides home. Sometimes I would sit there too, trying desperately to fit in. Many of them did not even realize I was in the same form as they were. These girls were usually lighter skinned, polished, and soft spoken, with dialects so far removed from mine that they sounded almost foreign. At the time, I had not yet mastered the art of code switching and was still receiving detention for pronouncing the word three as tree. The girls always seem immaculate, even on a Friday afternoon at 1:30. Meanwhile, I was struggling to keep my own uniform clean, washing my white blouse and belt by hand every evening after school, just so I could fit in. I could only dream of having the lives these girls seem born into, and the long walk down South Camp Road and in the boiling Kingston sun reminded me daily how far away these dreams felt. Coming home offered little comfort. Sometimes mommy would be rushing to sell peanuts so we could eat. Other times she would be lying in bed too weak to move, her feet cracked, swollen, and bleeding. These moments were constant reminders of her financial reality. The little girl inside me dreamed of having both a mother and a father at home, two parents supporting one another and being there for me. I promised myself that my future children would grow up differently. They would never have to worry about anyone touching them, and their fathers would be present. They would also feel safe and happy. By the time I entered fifth form, I had begun to worry about whether I would ever keep that promise to myself. Many days I would take money from Mr. Handsome and give it to my mother so she could prepare something for us to eat. Whenever she asked where the money came from, I lied and I told her I'd made it selling candies at school. You see, I was always hustling something in the classroom even though it was against the rules. I just had to. Lately, however, I began to feel uneasy about taking money from a man who was 10 years older than I was. His court case weighed heavily on my mind because I worried constantly about what would happen if he was to be remanded back in custody. Losing him would mean losing every ounce of security I believe I had, and I felt certain the overseer would finally get the chance to complete what he had started. I'd also begun hearing rumors that Mr. Hanson was involved in more than just selling marijuana. People whispered that he traveled outside the community carrying out other illegal activities. Everyone in the area already suspected that we were together, and I feared being caught up in whatever trouble surrounded him more than anything. And I also worried about what the stress would do to mommy. The thought alone made me sick. As if my worries was not enough, The gossiping neighbor I disliked had convinced mommy that the overseer was trying to obey her and that this was the reason she had become so ill. Soon, the neighbor and mommy began disappearing together for hours at a time, returning home with suspicious looking oils and remedies. Mommy would rub the oils on the sole of her feet, which had turned almost black from deep cracks that leaked fluids. Sometimes the cracks became so painful that she couldn't even stand in the shower and instead had to sit on a chair to take a bath. I begged Mommy repeatedly to visit the doctor, but she insisted her illness was a spiritual rather than a medical one. One Saturday morning, the overseer was digging in the small front garden directly beneath our window when he uncovered a suspicious looking bottle buried in the dirt. He smashed it open and claimed to have found parchment paper inside with his name written on it. He caused such a huge commotion, accusing Mommy of planting obeah to bring him bad luck. And within a week, another eviction notice appeared on our door. This time, it was signed by the younger girl his wife cared for. Mommy ignored it, pointing out that the girl was under 18 and therefore could not legally issue such a notice. In response, the overseer cursed both of us out viciously, calling us every derogatory name imaginable. For once in my life, I wish things could simply be normal. But destiny seems to have other plans for me. Mr. Handsome remained the person I could depend on. Yet, over time, he began becoming increasingly overprotective. If I went to do my hair and stayed too long at the hairdresser's, he became upset. If I stopped to speak with the girls in the community, he became upset. He constantly insisted that I stayed off the road and avoid talking to almost everyone. At first, I thought his behavior was cute, even protective, but eventually, he began threatening physical violence against people I spoke with. He believed that any girl he was with should not be friendly with everyone, and gradually, I found myself isolated from nearly everyone around me. Ironically, the isolation improved my grades, especially in mathematics and English, though emotionally it felt suffocating. One Saturday morning, Mommy became so weak that she asked me to accompany her to the clinic. She was adamant that I not take her to the hospital. You see, she feared Kingston Public Hospital intensely and often said people only went there to die. Whatever was happening to her had clearly become severe because she finally agreed to visit the medical center. Usually, my aunt would help her during times like these, but my aunt had recently migrated to America, leaving only the two of us to make the journey together. At the Windward Road Medical Center, the doctor insisted that mommy go to the hospital immediately. He prescribed antibiotics and painkillers and handed her more than 5 forms for blood tests. I'd assumed she would follow his instructions the next day, or at least by the following Monday. But instead, she filled a prescription and ignored all the tests and the stern warnings that the doctor gave her. A few days later, Mr. Handsome confronted me. He was furious. The anger in his face startled me, and when he demanded, I thought you said you were a virgin. Why did you lie to me? I stood frozen in shock. What do you mean? I said. Apparently, the overseer had been secretly speaking with the gossiping neighbor behind Mommy's back. Together, they spread a rumor that Mommy had taken me to abort a baby because I'd been sleeping around with everyone. Mr. Handsome heard the story and became enraged, believing that I'd been intimate with other men while refusing him. It took a long time to convince him the story was a lie. And eventually, I had to show him mommy's referral papers and blood test forms that she had been given by the doctor before he accepted my explanation. Even then, he warned me that the rumor was spreading through the community. You see, abortions were illegal in Jamaica, and in the early 1990s, it was considered deeply immoral for a teenage girl my age to terminate a pregnancy. There was rarely any shame placed on the male responsible for getting the girl pregnant in the first place. Instead, the girl carried the full weight of the guilt, judgment, and humiliation. If a teenage boy slept with multiple girls, he was often praised and celebrated by his peers, while the girls themselves was labeled with degrading names and publicly slut shamed. The rumor about me was spreading through the community like wildfire, but Mr. Handsome stepped in and shut it down by insisting that he knew for certain I'd never been pregnant and had not aborted a baby. I could hardly believe people were saying such things about me when I was still a virgin. It shocked me to my core. One night, I stood by my gate talking with the few friends I was allowed to speak with when three of the corner men approached me and motioned for me to come over. I recognized them immediately as the same men who usually followed behind Mr. Handsome. When I walked over, they quietly told me that he wanted to see me at his house. The request felt strange because he had never invited me over at night before, but I assume it must have been important and went without giving it much thought. All three men walked beside me as we made our way to his house. Their presence made me feel uneasy, but I ignored the feeling. That night, at 17 years old, I became intimate with a man for the first time. The pain and discomfort was unforgettable. Halfway through, I remember telling him to stop, but he didn't. I thought briefly about escaping, but the yard was dark, the ground uneven, and there were aggressive dogs roaming around. He would have had to escort me back out. And eventually, he noticed that I was crying from the pain and stopped. He said softly, "Sorry, B. Let me carry you back while you get." I could not tell whether he was disappointed or angry, and honestly, I just did not care. I got dressed slowly, my body sore and trembling. Then I turned and looked at the sheets. Blood. But I was not on my period. He looked at me quickly and he says, "Are you a time amount now?" "No," I answered quietly. "You sure?" "Yes," I answered. Nothing more was said after that. Getting back into the house became another ordeal entirely. It was after 10 p.m. and mommy had been searching for me while I was at his house. I was terrified, not only because of what had just happened, but because this was the first time I'd ever came home that late. When I knocked on the door, mommy opened it immediately. "The next time you come in at this time and now open this door, you're gonna stay out there permanently," she warned. All I could say was, "Yes, mommy," and went to my bed. Fifth form curriculum was very different from fourth form. There were now several important examination and certification that would determine a student's path into adulthood, tertiary education, or the work world. Some students plan to continue into lower sixth form and then eventually upper sixth. Others hope to attend university, while some intended to leave school and seek employment immediately after graduation. Already watched several of my close friends drop out of school because of teenage pregnancy and never return to complete their education. Despite mommy's worsening illness, I was still managing to continue into fifth form and made decisions about what kind of future I wanted for myself. That made me happy. When the guidance counselor signed mommy and me up for school support assistance, she also encouraged us to join the school saving program. Through a partnership with a financial institution, the program helps students save towards their examination fees. Every year, Mommy deposited 240 Jamaican dollars into an account called Save Today and Reap Tomorrow. If families save consistently for 3 or more years, the bank matched the savings 100%. I had been recommended to sit several Caribbean examination council subjects, and the match savings eventually covered almost 90% of my examination fees. By then, mommy had become so weak toed that she was unable to walk long distances selling peanuts. So she started operating a small stall on the corner instead. Unfortunately, this placed her in direct competition with the gossiping neighbor that I didn't like, who had now become her sworn enemy. The stall generated just enough money to buy a little food and restock supplies. Desperate, Mommy reached out to Daddy for help, but he never responded. At the same time, due to my curriculum, I did need to attend school regularly in the months leading up to our exam. I knew I needed to find work. We had fallen behind on rent and simply did not know what to do anymore. Although Mr. Handsome continued to give me money occasionally, it was nowhere near enough to cover our bills. I felt desperate watching Mommy deteriorate under the stress. She had begun losing her hair and had grown noticeably thinner. Something had to change. I still attended Saturday classes whenever I could, and on one afternoon while walking home afterwards, I unexpectedly saw my first boyfriend. Apparently, he had traveled overseas for some time and had recently returned to Jamaica. I was genuinely happy to see him. He smiled and motioned me over to come sit and talk with him in one of the nearby yards. I declined. First, I knew it would not look appropriate for me to disappear into a side yard with a boy in broad daylight where everybody could see. Second, I now had a boyfriend who strongly disliked me speaking to other men, and so I politely refused and began walking away. But he grabbed my backpack and ran into the yard, teasing that I would need to come and get it if I needed it back. Several other boys stood around laughing while I stood there feeling humiliated and belittled. Instead of chasing after the bag, I turned and I walked straight home. Oddly, the closer I came to home, the more emotional I became. By the time I turned into my lane, tears were already streaming down my face. A neighbor saw me crying near the gate and asked, Anna, what are you? I broke down and I told her everything. She reassured me that I had done the right thing and encouraged me to stop crying because eventually he would have to return my bag. I nodded and quietly went inside, feeling stupid. After taking a quick shower, I decided to walk back up to the road to retrieve my backpack. But as soon as I stepped outside again, I saw Mr. Handsome approaching with the backpack in his hand. He handed me the bag and barked, Do not go back up the road. You hear me? I want you not go back up there. My eyes widened as he walked away because in his hand clutched a large knife with what appeared to be blood still smeared along the blade. Soon, community gossip claimed that Mr. Handsome had gone up the road and fought both my former boyfriend and his cousin over my backpack. I never learned whether the story was true, but I knew one thing for certain. I never walked up that street again. That was the moment I began to see adult consequences hidden inside what I once believed to be love. I loved him, and in many ways, I felt protected by him. Yet, I was also slowly realizing that the life surrounding him was dangerous. I had escaped the overseer's unwanted attention only to find myself trapped in something far more complicated and potentially destructive. I felt as though I jumped out of the frying pan and directly into a fire. In the early 1990s, Jamaica had very few fast food restaurants. Small cook shop and local restaurants existed, but the fast food industry was only beginning to emerge. At the same time, banks seemed to be appearing on nearly every corner from King Street in downtown Kingston through Crossroad and into Upper St. Andrew. New banks and fast food chains were constantly being built. What puzzled me the most was that unemployment remained extremely high despite all this visible development. One day, while reading the newspaper, I noticed that Mother's Restaurant was hiring part time customer service representative. I did not fully understand what part time meant, but I understood one thing clearly: my mother needed my help. And so by this time, we were on study leave, which meant I only needed to attend school on days I was scheduled to sit my exams. Mommy had borrowed part of the money needed to pay the remaining balance of my examination fees, and I had managed to save a little from the candy hustle and from the pocket money Mr. Handsome occasionally gave me. However, we still were in need of additional finances, and therefore, I decided to seek a job. Sometimes I only attended school once a week to complete an exam, leaving me with large amount of free times that I believe could be better spent working. I told one of my school friends about the job advertisement and she agreed to come with me. When we arrived at the location, the line stretched far outside the building. The newspaper advertisement clearly stated that the applicants had to be at least 18 years old, but I was stubborn, and knowing how badly my mother needed help only strengthened my determination. By the time we finally made it inside, we were the last two waiting for interviews. The woman who conducted them looked at us with visible confusion, as though she could not understand why we were there. How old are you girls? She asked. Before my friend could answer, I spoke up confidently. We are 18 years old. I lied. Well, not entirely. My friend was already 18 and I would turn 18 in another few months, but I didn't let that lady know. The woman then looked directly at me and asked, "What school did you both attend?" Attend? I repeat to myself. Oh, she thought that I'd already graduated. Convent of Mercy Academy Alpha, I answered quickly. Her expression shifted again, puzzled and uncertain. Finally, she simply said, "Well, come back next week," before turning and walk away. My friend immediately started heading towards the exit, but I refused to give up. "Miss!" I called after her. I hurried towards the office before she could close the door. "Please," I begged softly. "I really need to work to help my mother. Things are bad at home and I really need a job." I could feel tears beginning to sting the back of my eyes. She paused and studied me carefully. I could tell my desperation had caught her off guard. She glanced towards my friend, then back at me before reaching into a folder and pulling out two sheets of paper. "Get these documents and bring them back by next Friday," she said. I thanked her repeatedly before hurrying away excitedly. But the moment I handed one of the sheets to my friend and properly read through my own paperwork, my stomach dropped. The form required a national insurance scheme number. You also had to be 18 years old to obtain one. Another obstacle, another brick wall. I felt demotivated. But that evening, I lay awake, desperately trying to figure out what I was going to do. So the next morning, I got dressed early. This time, I deliberately avoided wearing my school uniform and instead dressed as maturely as I could manage. When I entered the NIS office, I sat quietly in the waiting area, studying the faces of the tellers, trying to decide which one might be the easiest to approach. Eventually, my attention settled on one gentleman whose eyes seemed far more interested in my chest, which was already a sizable double D at the time, than in anything else around him. I walked confidently over to his desk and explained that I was there to apply for my NIS number. He in turn asked for my telephone number. Gotcha, I thought immediately. Smiling sweetly, I scribbled down a fake number on a piece of paper and I handed it to him. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his breast pocket before asking for my birth certificate. Feigning alarm, I gasped dramatically. "Oh no, I forgot my birth certificate at home." He paused briefly before saying, "Me I gonna let you through this time, just because you're pretty." From there, I excitedly danced out of the NIS office and down to the address that I needed to drop off all my documentations for the job application. I could hardly believe my luck, but that feeling did not last long. As I approached my yard gate later that day, my next door neighbor came running towards me, looking panicked. She immediately asked if I had heard the news. What news? I asked nervously. Them shot him. Him get shot. Them carry him gone to hospital immediately already. She explained. Apparently, Mr. Handsome had gotten shot, and the men further up the road who he had allegedly been in a fight with had shot him in retaliation over the fight for my backpack. My heart dropped instantly. I quickly asked which hospital he had been taken to. He has gone to Kingston Public Hospital, she answered. As I turned to leave, I heard my mommy calling after me. Be careful, Anne, be careful. Deep down, I knew she had already understood what had been happening between me and him. My mother was no fool. She had warned me repeatedly, but I refused to listen. And now this. Well, apparently, Mr. Handsome had another girl that was pregnant. He had gotten pregnant before she migrated to America. And now she had returned to Jamaica for a visit and had asked him to run an errand for her. Somewhere along the route, the men involved in the earlier dispute saw him and opened fire. Meeting her for the first time under those circumstances was painfully awkward. Both of us had already heard rumors about each other before this, and neither of us expected our first encounter to happen in a hospital after a shooting. The tension between us was immediate and impossible to ignore. The Kingston Public Hospital in Jamaica was originally built in the 1770s as an almshouse, asylum, and a hospital. By the mid 1800s, the asylum section was relocated to Raytown and renamed Bellevue Hospital. In its earliest years, the hospital primarily served white citizens, while enslaved black Jamaicans were largely left to treat themselves on plantations. KPH underwent major expansions beginning in 1962 and eventually became recognized as the largest trauma center in the English speaking Caribbean. Across the road stood Victoria Jubilee Hospital, known to most Jamaicans simply as Jubilee or Lining, which was opened in 1892 specifically to serve poor pregnant women. Despite KPH prestige and reputation across the Caribbean, the reality of hospitals during the late 1990s often felt starkly different. Almost every major emergency occurring in and around downtown Kingston was brought there, and with the rapidly increasing population at the time, the hospital system constantly seemed overwhelmed. On any given day, you could pass by and see security guards, police officers, or private citizens rushing injured people into the emergency section. There always seems to be a crowd gathered outside. I remembered visiting Jubilee Hospital earlier when my sister was giving birth to my niece and noticing the endless flurries of activities surrounding KPH's emergency department. There was no proper waiting area, and so families often sat along a low concrete fence near the parking lot while waiting for news about their loved ones. The morgue stood only a few doors away, and both formal and informal funeral homes operated nearby. The entire area felt heavy with grief, its smell of sickness, anxiety, and death. At 17 years old, learning that my boyfriend had been shot and rushing there alone meant walking directly into that heaviness while also facing the accusatory stares of his American baby mother and her family. Fear, anxiety, dread, every emotion collided inside me at once. My stomach began its familiar nervous rumbling, reacting immediately to the stress. The moment I stepped through the security entrance, I felt several pairs of eyes landed on me. The most piercing gaze belonged to his baby mother. I glanced in her direction and immediately understood why he had been with her. She was stunningly beautiful. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and I worried there might be some confrontation between us. After all, she was the mother of his child while I was just a high school girl. Before anything could happen, my next door neighbor who was there with him hurried towards me. Anne, Emma asks for you. Come let the security let you in, she said quickly. I was surprised he was asking for me at all. Part of me had prepared myself for the possibility that he would pretend I did not exist. Avoiding the gaze of his baby mother and her relatives, I quietly passed through security and entered the ward to see Mr. Handsome. He looked pale and thinner than I remembered. How was that even possible in such a short space of time? I'd seen him only the night before and he looked perfectly fine. Then I reminded myself that he had just been shot. When he saw me, he attempted a weak smile. I immediately reached for his hand, but the sight of the blood soaked sheet surrounding him shattered me. Tears began streaming down my face immediately. Suddenly, I flashed back to seeing my first gunshot victim on Wellington Street years before. The violent jerking of the body, the eyes rolling back into the person's head, the memory intensified my panic. He tried calming me down, insisting that he was going to be okay. Then, to my surprise, he warned me not to argue with his baby mother and assured me that he would speak to her so she would remain cordial with me. I was even stunned that he is thinking of that under these circumstances. Still, I understood that maintaining peace between us would likely ease tension with the family gathered outside. Eventually, the surgeon saw him remove one of the bullets and provided treatment he needed. Over the following days, I slowly got to know his baby mother. We began attending visiting hours at the hospital together, almost like old friends. I found myself reflecting constantly on how intelligent she was, in addition to being beautiful. Ironically, I never viewed myself as either. I knew I could attract attention if I truly tried, but I never genuinely saw myself as being beautiful. Mommy was not the type of person or parent to compliment appearances or openly express affection in that way when I was smaller. Life had been too hard for such soft affirmations. And my father was largely absent, and when he did appear, he addressed my mother rather than me directly. The rejection and neglect I experienced growing up never nurtured confidence within me. So after meeting her, I found myself quietly questioning what Mr. Handsome or any man could possibly see in me. After several visits, his baby mother eventually returned to America. Although his aunt helped occasionally, I essentially became responsible for Mr. Handsome's daily care in the hospital. I brought toiletries, washed his bloodstained clothing, and tried to keep his spirits lifted. One nurse who constantly saw me coming and going eventually stopped me and asked both my age and my relationship to this man. When I answered honestly, disgust flashed across her face. But at that age, I was not someone who would openly defend herself, so I simply walked away in silence. Thankfully, he was discharged after about 3 weeks. It was overwhelming trying to balance his recovery, my CXC studies, helping mommy at home, and the growing tension inside the community. People had been warning me that reprisals might follow the shooting. Many also blame me entirely because I'd been involved with both men. Nobody believed that I'd only been intimate with one of them or that I never wanted any harm to come to either of them. Tensions eventually escalated between Mr. Handsome Gang and my ex-boyfriend group. Fearing for my safety, mommy decided it would be the best for me to stay temporarily with my cousins and relatives. In truth, the distance gave me room to breathe and focus on studying. By then, Mr. Handsome had become even more controlling following the shooting. One day, I wore a miniskirt to the hospital and he snapped harshly. On the bitches wear them things there now. Now wear back that again. Immediately defended myself and told him that I was not a bitch. But deep inside, the fantasy I'd created about he and I was beginning to unravel piece by piece. While all this was happening, I also received a call from Mothers Enterprises Limited inviting me to begin training at a newly opened branch in downtown Kingston near the War Theatre. This was located at Upper King Street. The group of customer service representative I train with would become the first set of staff assigned to work in that location. My friend also received a call and I was ecstatic for her. Not long afterwards, political representative within the community intervened and negotiated a truce between the rival groups. As a result, I was finally able to return home to live with my mommy again instead of staying with my cousins. I welcomed the change because although my cousins had been kind, staying with them long term had become more difficult. More than anything else, I simply wanted to be home with my mother. By then, she was becoming alarmingly thin and frail, while the overseer continued harassing us because the rent was only being paid in small portions. That same week, while sitting my CXC examinations, I officially started working at Mother's fast food restaurant. I specifically requested mostly night shifts so I could continue studying and attend my exams during the daytime. My supervisor, a man, was surprisingly understanding. He could not understand how I had managed to secure the job while still attending high school, but he told me that he admired my determination to finish school while helping my mother financially. My first paycheck was $45. I'd work exhausting night shifts until my feet burned with pain. The restaurant often remained open until nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. And many nights, Mr. Handsome walked me home afterwards, and I constantly feared for both of us traveling through downtown Kingston at those hours in the morning. Gun violence was common, and danger always felt close while we were walking home. My friend had been assigned to South Parade branch and hated the placement. The work itself was demanding. We had to prepare patties and burgers, hot dogs, and drinks while managing impatient crowds. This was our first job, and so it was not easy on us. Outside the restaurant, loud street vendors constantly sold their goods nearby, and whenever service slowed down, they cursed us aggressively. The pay was small compared to the amount of work we had to do, but I stuck with it because I didn't have any other choice. I never intended to remain there long term because I wanted to give my mother a better life than the one that she was struggling through. Every payday, I handed my entire check over to mommy and survived mainly on the small pocket money Mr. Handsome had give me. Deep down, I dreamt of the day I would no longer need to accept money from him. His temper was becoming increasingly unbearable, and every day I felt like navigating an emotional minefield just to avoid triggering another outburst from him. One day, a customer entered the restaurant and ordered a patty. My coworker reached for one from the display batch, but the customer insisted she wanted a fresh one directly from the oven. Even after being told that the patty on display were freshly prepared, she remained adamant. Eventually, my coworker gave in and served her a piping hot patty straight from the oven. The woman bit into it immediately, and within seconds, the scalding filling burned her lip and mouth, causing her to cry out in pain. A few of us behind the counter chuckled instinctively at the situation, which only enraged her further. Without warning, she flung the hot patty directly into my coworker's chest. Before I could even think, I bent down, picked up the falling pastry, and hurled it right back at her. And the chaos erupted instantly. A full fight broke out between staff members and several customers inside the restaurant. The police had to be called, and by the time the store was finally cleared and closed, a large amount of food and supplies was destroyed. In the end, management deducted the losses from our wages, and our entire shift was suspended for a week. After 2 weeks of work, I received less than $15. And although I was not fired, I quit almost immediately and began searching for another job. I then had completed my CXC examinations and was anxiously waiting the results. I used what remained of my final paycheck to enroll in a cashiering course because cashier jobs seemed to be in high demand at that time. The program only lasted 1 week, and I had convinced myself that it would eventually lead to something far better than the fast food job that I had received before. I also tried persuading my friend to leave her South Parade position because she constantly complained about the conditions there, but she refused. Once again, I found myself on my own. Towards the end of that same week, I received some devastating news. My grandmother in St. Anne had died. The woman had been like a mother to me, and something inside me shattered when I heard the news. Her death felt as though it took a piece of me that I would never fully recover. Even now, if I sit quietly long enough, I sometimes feel as though I could smell her scent around me. Mommy was too weak to travel to St. Anne, so I had to prepare to go alone. Once again, Mr. Handsome stepped in to help financially. Part of me appreciated the break from Kingston, but the occasion itself filled me with grief and sorrow. By then, intimacy with him no longer felt like something mutual. His demands were never really requests, they were expectations. The room where I first became intimate with him had never changed. The same bed, the same sheets, the same leak dripping through the roof. I had repeatedly expressed my fear of becoming pregnant before I was emotionally or financially ready. Mommy brought it up almost daily as well, pleading with me to leave him alone. But by then, I felt trapped. Mr. Handsome had already threatened to kill me if I ever tried to leave him. And at one point, he even showed me a bullet from one of his guns and calmly told me that was what he would use. The fear of dying felt greater than the fear of staying, so I stayed. The compromise became birth control pills, which I secretly kept at his house so I could take them every morning. Some things went according to plan, but other mornings he was not at home and I missed doses entirely. By then, he had started growing his hair into locks and was smoking marijuana more heavily. More men constantly surrounded him at his yard and his regular hangout spots. Yet, every morning when I visited, I often found him sitting quietly reading the Bible. No one around him dared interrupt until he was finished reading. The morning I prepared to travel to St. Anne's, I stopped by his yard to collect some traveling money and found him seated beneath the ackee tree reading scriptures from the Bible. I quietly sat nearby, waiting for him to finish because I did not want to trigger his temper. As I swung my feet beneath the chair, I suddenly noticed something strange. The Bible was upside down. I stared silently, unsure whether to laugh or point it out. Instead, I sat there watching him carefully turn pages with deep concentration on a book that was turned upside down. When he finished, he closed the Bible, prayed, and looked at me smilingly. A small giggle escaped my lips, and thankfully, he did not seem to understand why. We spoke briefly before I left, but eventually, he warned me not to speak to strangers while in the country, especially them country boy they, because according to him, men afraid for shot a country boy in him face. I didn't answer. He thought I was a child. Anyway, the contrast between him and reading the Bible moments earlier and then casually threatening violence felt almost surreal. But by then, many of his behaviors had begun feeling increasingly unstable to me. The funeral drew a massive crowd. I cried until my eyes became swollen shut. My siblings were devastated. Grandma had been the only true mother figure many of them had ever known. Mummy had moved to Kingston while they were still very young, leaving them in St. Anne with their father and grandmother. Their father struggled with alcoholism, which meant grandma had largely raised my siblings by herself. My third sister had also dropped out of school after becoming pregnant as a teenager, and the man she claimed was a father loudly denied paternity, leaving grandma to help raise yet another child, her own great granddaughter. Although she was not my biological grandmother, she never treated me any differently from her other grandchildren. Her death was not only a loss to our family, but to the entire farming community around her. We all wept. At the funeral, I once again encountered the man my sister had teased me about since childhood. The man they claim was my father. My siblings nickname him Shine Brown Ganja Teeth, though most of the people in the community simply call him Shine Brown. He stood among a group of men and motioned for me to come over. Instantly, resentment flooded through me as the memories resurfaced of him rejecting me and speaking negatively about my mommy. I hesitated, but one of my sisters nudged me insistently towards him. What is your name and your father's name? He asked. Even in that solemn moment, the question felt deeply inappropriate and humiliating. My anger intensified immediately. Staring directly at him, I answered firmly, "My name is Anne Marie Morrison, and you are not my father." Then I turned away sharply in disgust. My sisters looked stunned that I had spoken to him in that way. But for the first time in a long time, I felt as though I had reclaimed a piece of my dignity. How dare he attempt to disrespect me publicly at my grandmother's funeral after years of rejection? A few weeks after the funeral, my examination results arrived. I had successfully passed all seven subjects, earning especially strong grades in mathematics and English language. The result opened several possible paths for me, either attending lower sixth form, university, or the route many inner city students eventually took, immediate employment. Mommy strongly wanted me to pursue university, but I could not imagine how we would survive financially if I did. So instead, I began aggressively searching for work. Every day, I registered with employment agencies and walked from business to business across various plazas searching for employment. At one point, I worked briefly at a bar, but the owner quickly fired me after recognizing me as his daughter's classmate from Convent of Mercy Academy Alpha High School. He insisted that no recent high school graduate should be working in a bar. One afternoon, exhausted after another long day of job hunting, I unexpectedly ran into my former best friend's mother. She was working as a social worker in an Upper St. Andrew hospital. After asking about my life and future plans, she seemed surprised when I explained that I was searching for work instead of continuing on to lower sixth form. I told her the truth. Mommy was sick and we simply did not have the money. She kindly offered to ask the hospital's human resources department whether or not they were hiring. And as it turns out, they were. After months of rejection and uncertainty, I finally secured a job working as a billing clerk at the hospital. I could hardly believe my luck. The opportunity arrived at exactly the right time. It felt as though growing older had suddenly sharpened my awareness about everything around me. Several things had happened leading up to that moment. I'd officially graduated from high school. Mommy cried throughout the entire graduation ceremony and screamed proudly when my name was called. And honestly, she deserved that moment. Despite her own declining health, little support from a father and a stubborn teenage daughter, which was me, she had done an incredible job raising me on her own. Mr. Handsome did not attend a ceremony. According to him, thugs don't wear suits, not even for their teenage girlfriends. Meanwhile, my father suddenly reappeared after years of absence. By then, he had divorced his Caucasian wife and moved on to a fifth marriage, this time to a police officer. He introduced me to her proudly and boasted openly about my examination results. I listened quietly, inwardly cringing at the performance. Once he returned to America, we heard almost nothing from him again. It was around that time that I also discovered that Mr. Handsome struggled severely with reading and writing after helping him complete a passport application form. I also began hearing rumors that he was involved with a 14-year-old girl who lived a few yards away from me. Then one night, I saw her being escorted into his yard by the same boys who had once brought me there before. The sight made me physically sick. She was only 14 years old. Suddenly, everything became painfully clear. The same older people who once admired Mr. Handsome were now quietly warning young girls and young boys to stay away from him. He had also begun carrying a gun openly and seemed to enjoy showing it to me repeatedly. For the first time, I began looking at him with genuine disgust rather than admiration. I finally understood that most of the men in my life were not people I could depend on consistently. If I wanted stability, I would have to create it for myself. Mommy needed me more than ever, and deep down, I knew with certainty that Mr. Anson was not the person I could build a future with. I desperately wanted out of the relationship. I just needed to find a way to leave him without him hurting me. Little did I know then that the life I was trying to save was not only my own, but also that of my unborn child. For listening to chapter 8 of my book, A Journey from Jamaica to Becoming. If you are still listening at this point, please remember to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, share it with your friends. This helps me to create more similar videos for this channel. Thank you from Blooms and Stitches by Anne Marie. Until I see you in the next one.